Promotion, a paladin spell. For 1 mana, you can give a Silverhand Recruit +3/+3. That is a lot of stats, 1 mana 3/3, but I still don't know how much I love this card. You do still have to invest some mana into getting a Silverhand Recruit, so if you're just hero powering and playing this, it's a 3 mana 4/4, which is not great. The dream, I guess, is you coin hero power and then double promote, so you have a 7/7 that can attack on turn 2, which is kind of strong, but you're coining out a paladin hero power, which I don't think you would ever actually do in a real game of Hearthstone. Unless you're against, like, I don't know, maybe specifically against warrior, that could be okay. Or priest, that could be okay. But that just seems kind of mediocre. The best thing you're doing with this is probably the Sinful Sous Chef, the 1 mana 2/1, I believe, that when it dies, adds Silverhand Recruits to your hand. So you play that on 1, trade it off, and then turn 2 you can play a Recruit and a Promotion for 2 mana 4/4, which is pretty good, but it's like also not that insane. But it's not like you have to play this early for it to be good. You can just play it in your Silverhand Recruit deck. There's the Buffet Biggin, I think it's called, that makes 2 recruits that can have Divine Shield and some buffed up stats. So you can just like play this on turn 5 after you have that sitting around. But I still don't really think I love this card. I think it's just a bit too specific for me to really be excited about it. Like maybe if this gave a minion +2/+2 or +2/+1, and then if it was a Silverhand Recruit, then it gives it a total of +3/+3, then like that I would be a lot more excited about. But it's just so much specifically dedicated to Silverhand Recruits. And I don't think it's that easy, even with like the Sous Chef and the Biggin. I don't think it's that easy to always have a recruit. And it's just like, I don't know, maybe I'm overvaluing Smothering Starfish, but I feel like that card is just so good and it's so ubiquitous that for a card that's simply buffing a minion, I feel like it has to be really good for me to be excited about it. And I don't feel like this is quite that good. But I don't know, if you're playing Sous Chef and the Biggin and like maybe one other Silverhand Recruit card, maybe this card is just good enough to make the cut, and sometimes it's dead, but sometimes it's really strong. Ghastly Gravedigger for Rogue, a 3 mana 4/3 with Battlecry. If you control a secret, choose a card in your opponent's hand to shuffle into their deck. So we haven't seen any Rogue secrets yet, so it's pretty hard to evaluate this card. But if we just make the assumption that Rogue can have secrets in play, this card is super broken. 3 mana 4/3 that denies a card to your opponent is just insane. I think I would be willing to play some pretty mediocre secrets to enable this card, but at the moment we haven't seen any secrets, so it's kind of hard to say. Potentially insane though. The Harvester of Envy, a priest legendary. 3 mana 4/3, after you play a card copied from the opponent, steal the original. So something that wasn't immediately obvious to me, but I believe is true, is this will steal the original from wherever it is. So say you play a Draconid Operative and you discover a copy of a card in your opponent's deck, you immediately play that card alongside the Harvester of Envy, you will steal the card from your opponent's deck. But say you play Draconid Operative, steal a card from your opponent's deck, and wait, and then your opponent 4 turns later, they draw the card that you stole the copy of, or that you copied, they play that minion into play, and then you go Harvester plus that minion, you would mind control the one that your opponent has in play. Because it doesn't matter where it is currently, as long as you copied it from your opponent at some point, Harvester of Envy will steal it. That's my understanding of how this card works, which could be wrong, but I think it's true. But even with that being said, I just don't think there are enough cards to support this. There's like Draconid Operative and Psychic Conjurer and like, I don't know, maybe a Copycat or something. There's just not that much that's copying stuff from your opponent as priest. And even if you do copy the stuff, like you have to play the Harvester of Envy along with it. And that's a 3 mana card, so like if you copy an 8-drop, it's going to be really hard to combo that with Harvester of Envy, just because mana restrictions. And there's just some stuff that's like kind of weird, like a board clear or something that would just kill your Harvester of Envy. So I think it's a cute card. It'll definitely lead to some pretty sick highlights, but I don't think the card pool really supports it at the moment. But it doesn't take that many cards to make this card look pretty insane. And if they made something more targeted that was like a 1 mana spell that steals or that copies the highest cost card in your opponent's deck, then you could maybe pretty consistently play that with Harvester to seal the opponent's win condition and shut down a combo deck. But at the moment, I'm not too impressed with it. Maze Guide, a neutral 2-mana 1/1 with Battlecry, summon a random 2-cost minion. I think this card is maybe just pretty decent. It's a decent amount of stats for a 2-drop. Basically, you get a random 2-drop, which is probably understated, but you get a 1/1 on top of that, which is kind of nice. Has some evolve synergy, has some infuse synergy, which is maybe more generally applicable. It's probably just kind of fine. I'd be surprised if it sees 0 play, but I don't really expect it to show up in every deck. Natural Causes for Druid, a 2-mana nature spell that says deal 2 damage and summon a 2/2 treant. I think the card is like kind of fine, but kind of mediocre. I don't really see a home for this card. I think it's just a little bit too low impact for something like Alignment Druid or other ramp druids. Maybe it's pretty good in a token druid. It's just like a pretty good tempo card. But a lot of times those token druids, they really want to be playing like taunts for Razormane Battle Guard or just like other things that have synergy. But it is a nature spell. There's a big legendary in this set that cares about nature spells. Is it the, I think Herald of Nature cares about a nature spell. This is a pretty good lead into that, so that's a good reason that you would want to play this in Token Druid. There's also Guff, the 3-mana Guff. So I think the card's pretty fine. Probably decent in Token Druid, but I think it's a bit low impact for slower Token Druid, or for slower Druids in general. Those decks did like playing Lunar Eclipse, but Lunar Eclipse was 0 mana, and this is 2 mana to deal 1 less damage. Bog Beast. 6 mana 3/6 taunt. With Death Rattle, summon a 2/4 Muckmare with taunt. So this is kind of a Sludge Belcher, but Sludge Belcher I think is not very good anymore. So I think this card is probably not very good. +1 mana on Sludge Belcher for 1 extra stat on the main body and then, 1/2 on the second body. I think it's just pretty mediocre. I think you're going to need a deck that can cheat this card out to ever really be interested in playing it. And I'm not sure that there's like a card that would do that at the moment. But I mean, it's certainly a card that with the right card pool could eventually see play. I just, at the moment, think it's a bit too weak for me to be spending 6 mana on it. Muckborn Servant for Paladin. 3 mana 2/4 with taunt. Battlecry, discover a Paladin card. I feel like this is maybe the most boring card that's ever been printed. They already have the 2 mana 1/3 that discovers a holy spell. They have Knight of Anointment on 1 that draws a holy spell, and then on turn 3 you're just playing another card that makes a Paladin card. I don't know, seems kind of boring. But compared to Stonehill Defender, this is the same thing, but +1 attack. You discover a Paladin card. I don't really know that discovering a Paladin card is that good, because there's like a bunch of secrets, and there are some stinky big Paladin cards that aren't going to be good in decks playing this, and just generally kind of weird situational cards. But 3 mana 2/4 taunt that draws a card is probably fine. Probably good enough for Control Paladin. Might be good enough for Hand Buff Paladin. Maybe it's even good in Silverhand Recruit Paladin, because you can draw a Silverhand Recruit card maybe. I don't know. It's probably fine. Batty Guest for Hunter. 1 mana 1/1 with Death Rattle, summon a 2/1 bat. I mean, it just seems pretty good for a 1-drop. We've seen like Mecharoo and Possessed Villager have seen play as 1/1s that make a 1/1. This is a 1/1 that makes a 2/1. And this is also in a set that cares about the infuse keyword, so 2 minions on your 1-drop is pretty nice. It's also not a beast up front, which is good for some of the hunter synergies that want to play big beasts. It's a 1-drop that pretty much, not totally, but pretty much guarantees a doggy biscuit on turn 2. So I think this card is just pretty good, fits in a variety of hunter decks. I expect it will be played. Forensic Duster, 3 mana 3/4 with Battlecry, your opponent's minions cost 1 more next turn. So you can kind of compare this to Cult Neophyte, but I do think Cult Neophyte was quite a bit better than this card. Cult Neophyte was 1 less mana, which is really good for a disruption card. You want disruption cards to be cheap so you can develop alongside them to make the disruption more relevant. This being, 50% more mana is definitely relevant. And I think locking out your opponent's spells is probably better than locking out their minions. Because if you're an aggressive deck and you play Cult Neophyte, you want them to not clear your board with Drain Souls and Touch of the Nathrazim and stuff like that. You don't really care too much about them playing, you know, their random 5-drop or whatever. But it is potentially pretty good against something like an Entitled Customer that is a minion that would clear the board. Or it's good against like Lady Prestor on turn 6. Or it can stop your opponent from playing a Mountain Bear on turn 4. So it does definitely have its applications, but I think it's like deceptively different from Cult Neophyte. And I definitely don't think it'll just be randomly thrown into nearly as many decks as the Neophyte. But it's maybe just generally pretty good in aggressive or mid-range mirrors, because you play your 3-drop on turn 3, and then your opponent is not able to play their 4-drop on turn 4, which can really, really throw off their curve. So yeah, pretty good card. Might see a ton of play. I'll be pretty interested to see what decks actually end up using this. Sketchy Stranger. 2-mana 2/2 with Battlecry. Discover a secret from another class. So the secret classes are going to be Hunter, Mage, Paladin, and presumably Rogue this expansion, but we don't know that for sure yet. And I think generally with the secrets in the game at the moment, they're like all pretty good. There aren't too many trash secrets. You can find like Avenge or Judgment of Justice or Freezing Trap, Explosive Trap, Ice Barrier, Explosive Runes. There's a lot of variety and a lot of them that are just pretty strong. But I'm not totally sure what deck would want to play this card. It's kind of like a Wand Maker type effect. So maybe just a lot of control decks want to play this card. Maybe like Priest in particular would want to play this card because they could discover, you know, it's a 2-mana card that could discover like an Ice Barrier or a Counterspell to help with their quest. Maybe this would be pretty good in Big Spell Mage that would want access to these types of cards, but, you know, can't actually play small spells. And of course, if there's any deck that cares about secret synergy, they would be interested in playing this card. There's the new Rogue card that cares a lot about secrets. You would probably play this along with it. I actually don't know if any of the other classes have secret synergy at the moment. There's the Paladin minion that draws a card when you have a secret in play. Oh, Cloaked Huntress is in the game, isn't it? So this could be pretty good in a Cloaked Huntress deck. I think there are a lot of different decks that would be interested in playing this card. I think the power level of it is high. So I think it's pretty reasonable that this would see play. Also, there is a card in the game now that wants you to have 40 cards in a deck, so everything that looks kind of good is maybe a little bit better than it looks. Sinrunner. 5-mana 6/5 beast with Death Rattle, destroy a random enemy minion. I think the problem with this card is that it's just a Death Rattle. It doesn't have Rush or Taunt or whatever, so your opponent can just kind of ignore it, which I think makes it a bit weird. They also can play around it because it's really obviously telegraphed, so they can just play a bunch of small minions or whatever. So I think for those reasons, it's probably not going to be very good, but maybe it'll be playable in like Hunter because it's a beast. You could cheat it out with Sunken Saber or something like that. Can draw a cheap version of it with the Harpoon Gun. Maybe it's decent in Druid with the Hedge Maze location card that triggers Death Rattles. But none of those synergies really stand out too much to me. Maybe I'm underestimating the fact that this is a 5-mana 6/5, which is pretty big, and your opponent does kind of have to deal with it. But in any situation where you want the Death Rattle, they're probably winning, so they probably don't need to deal with it. I don't know, it's just a pretty awkward card, I would say. Spirit Poacher, 2-mana 2/2 for Hunter. With Battlecry, summon a random Dormant Wild Seed. So I don't know, I don't think we've seen any other cards that make Dormant Wild Seeds. So I don't know if this is going to be a thing or if we just have to memorize new cards for this card. But the Wild Seeds are the Fox Spirit Wild Seed, which is a 3/1 beast that's dormant for 1 turn and then has Rush. And then there's a 2/5 beast that's dormant for 2 turns and has Taunt. And a 5/4 beast that's dormant for 3 turns. And when it awakens, you equip a 4/2 weapon. So I would say all of those outcomes are pretty good. This is a 2-mana 2/2, so it doesn't need too much help. But the next turn you can deal 3 damage. The turn after that you could have a 2/5 taunt. Or the turn after that you can make a 5/4 that equips a 4/2. That's just a lot of stats. This is also summoning 2 bodies for Infuse, which is maybe good. It's not a beast itself, so it's not blocking those synergies in Hunter. I mean, this card is just good, right? I think all the outcomes are good. It comes down early enough in the game that it's not like you immediately need to taunt or you lose the game or whatever. I think there's not a whole lot to say about this card. It's just generally very strong. Famished Fool. 5 mana 3/5 with Battlecry, draw a card. Infuse 4, draw 3 instead. So 5 mana 3/5 that draws a card is pretty bad. We have Azure Drake in the game, which doesn't see any play, and it's a 5 mana 4/5 with spell damage. But if you infuse 4 and make it draw 3 cards, 5 mana 3/5 that draws 3 is pretty damn good. Compare that to like Gorlock Ravager, which actually does see play and has a worse stat line. You do have to infuse with this card to make it playable, so it wouldn't just necessarily slot into like a control warrior or whatever. But I think there are a lot of decks that could play this card. Like Shaman and Paladin, the slower versions of those decks can just play their hero powers to stack up some infuses. Shaman can play Schooling, Paladin can play... Well, Paladin just generally plays a lot of minions. Druid has a lot of spells that make a bunch of minions, although I don't know if they need this card, but maybe they do. I think this card is just generally pretty powerful. This stat line drawing 3 cards is just good. And I don't think it's that hard to infuse, even though it is a bit of work. Bibliomite for Demon Hunter. A 2 mana 4/4 with Battlecry, choose a card in your hand to shuffle into your deck. I'm not totally sure how this works, if it's like a discover choice or if you get to pick from all the cards in your hand. I would assume it's a discover. But regardless, this is effectively discarding a card from your hand to make a 2 mana 4/4, which sounds pretty powerful, but like Succubus was a card way back in the day that was a 2 mana 4/3 that did basically the same thing, and that card was always terrible. But I will say the 1 extra health jumping from 3 to 4 on a 2-drop is very significant, because with 4 health, this isn't dying to the various Dark Bomb effects in the game. It's not trading with Bloodfin Raptors. So that's a very relevant stat point. And also, since this card was first revealed, it's been further contextualized by a couple of other Demon Hunter cards that want you to have a small hand. There's the weapon, and there's the new 7/7. So with those in mind, this card looks a little bit better. There is also some potential that because you can pick the card you're shuffling into your deck, you can like maybe get an expensive clunky card out of the way for an outcast effect, which is maybe even an upside for this card. So the more I look at this, the more I think, okay, this actually could be pretty good. It's a lot of stats on a 2-drop. I think Demon Hunter has some ways to mitigate the downside of this card, so it could be pretty good. There's also some potential that this ends up being a combo card, where you can like shuffle something into your deck so you can later discount it with the Demon Hunter questline or something like that. Or you can shuffle something in so you can cheat it out with, I don't know, like Proving Grounds or something. Probably doesn't make much sense specifically in that deck, but there's some potential for this effect to be a combo card. But I think generally you're probably playing this as a 2 mana 4/4. And 2 mana 4/4 is pretty big. Serrated Bone Spike for Rogue. A 2 mana spell that deals 3 damage to a minion. If it dies, your next card this turn costs 2 less. I mean, this has to just be a really good card, right? 2 mana deal 3 to a minion is already like kind of fine. And then if it kills it, you get to strap a preparation onto this. This card also synergizes really well with the new legendary that makes a weapon that gains a stat for every card you've played, because this is effectively a 0 mana card if you play it in the right circumstance. It's good with the location that cares about the same thing. Maybe it's like good with Edwin. So a lot of potential synergy. I think maybe the scariest synergy with this card is just with preparation, because you can prep this out to make this cost 0, and then this kills something which says your next card this turn costs 2 less. So if you have the Serrated Bone Spike, you can effectively prep a minion. So we're talking like turn 3 Krakatoa. I think this card is just generally good on its own, has a lot of synergy in the rogue class. There's no way this card doesn't see play. Suspicious Alchemist for Mage. A 1 mana 1/3 with Battlecry, discover a spell. If your opponent guesses your choice, they get a copy. So pretty similar to the Priest minion we saw. So the way this works is you just discover like normal, and then at the start of your opponent's turn, they are offered a discover choice to pick the card you got. This card's probably just pretty decent. It's a Dire Mole with upside. It gives you a card. Your opponent might also get a card, but there's like ways to mind game it or like pick the second best spell so they get nothing at all. Makes a lot of sense in something like Big Spell Mage. I think this card is just probably pretty good and probably will see a decent amount of play. Even if Mage ends up going in like a more aggressive direction or something, then this card would be at home in that deck as well. And if there are multiple Mage decks in the game, multiple like competitive Mage decks, then this card suddenly, it gets like more effective. Because say there's like an aggressive Fireball deck and then like a Big Spell Mage deck, and then your opponent is offered the choice of like, did they take Fireball or did they take Blizzard? Some kind of choice like that. And on turn 1, they're not going to know what kind of deck you're playing, so they won't know what kind of card you would have potentially taken. So yeah, pretty good card in a lot of Mage decks, I would say.